Thanks for the introduction, Sven. So my name is Max from the Ruhr University in Bochum. This is Miranda from the University of Chicago, and we are jointly presenting our work on designing password reuse notifications. As we all know, we should use unique and hard-to-guess passwords for all our accounts. But come on, it's 2018, we have hundreds of accounts. So how can you have unique passwords for every site without having to worry about remembering them? I mean, it's easy for us. We are security experts. We simply use a password manager. But most people still don't use password managers. So how do those people cope with this? Usually they reuse their passwords across sites. So the question is why? Because no one is able to remember 100 unique passwords. People know they shouldn't do this, but the question is, why is password reuse such a big deal? Imagine you're the system administrator of a company called Acmico, and you follow best practices. For example, you deployed a memory hard hash function. You provide advice and give feedback on password strength during account creation, and you rate limit online guessing on your site, and you log affected accounts. You think you did a great job. In fact, you did not. There's something wrong. Let me explain why. Imagine Jim at mail.com not only has an account with Acmico, but also with LinkedIn. And that's a problem, as a couple of years ago, LinkedIn was hacked. At the time, script kiddies exploited a simple SQL injection attack. This way, they were able to steal over 160 million credentials. But worse, LinkedIn didn't hash their passwords with their computational expensive and memory hard hash function. Instead, they used fast SHA-1, without any salting or any additional iterations. As a consequence, offline guessing attackers were able to crack almost all of the hashes. It's over 99% already. Now back to Acmico. The issue is that no matter what security measures Acmico took, if Jim reused his password for Acmico and on LinkedIn, his account is vulnerable. Attackers will only need a single guess to get into the account, so Acmico's rate limiting is not going to help. And it's not only LinkedIn, but others. Over the last years, over 300 major companies have suffered password breaches of this sort, leading to over 5.5 credentials floating around on the black market. So it's nothing hypothetical, but the real life. It's the world we live in. Since attackers are going to come no matter what you do, and proactive companies with lots of resources monitor black market sites for leaked credentials. They check all credentials they are able to find against their own database and looking for matches. Facebook is doing this for a couple of years already, so have a number of other companies. In such a case, they force the user to reset their password, but of course you need to give some explanation to the user, thus they need to send out notifications while forcing the password reset. In this work, we studied these kinds of notifications, so-called password reuse notifications. We define password reuse notifications as those that companies send users in situations that may have been caused by password reuse. Surprisingly, no one has studied these password reuse notifications. So using black market data to notify users isn't as easy as one might think. We scoured the internet, including social media, security blogs, to find notifications that companies had sent out. We collected overall 24 notifications that companies have actually sent. They were all very different, for example, in how they explained the issue, what they told people to do, and the context they gave. This notification from Facebook is an example of a password reuse notification. It says, your Facebook password matches one that was stolen from another site, and goes on and tells you what to do about it. People on Twitter were discussing this notification, not realizing what had caused it to show up. People didn't get how another site got their Facebook password, not realizing that the user simply used the password on both places. To better understand what these notifications communicate, we conducted 2 user studies. In preparation for the studies, we used affinity diagramming. That's a process that let us group similar notifications to select 6 representative. Now I hand over to Miranda, and she will tell you how we did this.
Thanks, Max. So as he mentioned, we conducted 2 complementary user studies. In the first study, we surveyed a set of users to understand password reuse notifications that companies had actually sent out in the past. And in the second study, we designed our own model notification to evaluate the individual components. To begin study 1, we asked respondents to imagine that you have an account that you care a lot about with Acme Co. And then we showed them a notification like this one. Now, we wanted to make sure that we were getting respondents' reactions to the notification itself. And by that, I mean the text of the notification. So we removed all of the original branding and rebranded the notifications as if they were sent from Acme Co. This way, we would be able to avoid any biases from participants who have a bias against a particular company, or avoid any confounds from the visual layout. After respondents saw the notification, we asked 5 broad categories of questions. First, we wanted to know what users were generally understanding from the notification. We asked respondents 2 free response questions. First, please describe what the notification is telling you, and then please describe all of the factors that may have led to you receiving this notification. We also wanted to know how people felt about receiving our notification. As a security notification, did they feel fear? Were they confused? And so we elicited their gut reactions by asking them to list 3 feelings they would have if they received our notification in real life. Similarly, we also wanted to know what actions respondents would take in response to these notifications. Would their proposed actions actually solve the problem? And so we asked them to list 3 actions. Then, we asked respondents for their perceptions of 7 aspects of the notification, such as the delivery method and the legitimacy. Each of these was a Likert scale question paired with a free response justification for their answer. And we concluded with demographic information. So for study 1, we recruited 180 respondents from MTurk. All of our respondents lived in the US and were over 18 years old. Our survey took about 15 minutes, and respondents were compensated $2.50. Each respondent was placed in one of 6 conditions, and those 6 conditions were the 6 representative notifications. So LinkedIn, Netflix, Instagram, Facebook, and 2 different notifications from Google. So what did we find? Well, we found that security notifications are perceived as concerning. Respondents listed that they would feel worried or afraid and a host of other negative feelings if they received our notification. Some said that they might feel neutral feelings like surprise or concern, and others even said that they would feel safe if a company sent them a notification to inform them about this situation. 83% of our respondents said that if they received this notification, they would perceive it as very high or high priority. So in short, these notifications were successful at eliciting concern. Unfortunately, they were not as successful at clearly explaining the root cause. So as I mentioned before, we asked respondents to describe all of the factors that could have caused them to receive our notification. 60% said that it could be because of a hacked account, whether a real hack or maybe Acme Co. found some suspicious activity. 21% said that it could have been because of a data breach. But this is, after all, a study about password reuse. So how many respondents listed that password reuse could have been the cause? Well, that depends on the notification. We find that if the notification doesn't mention password reuse explicitly, even if password reuse could have been a cause, essentially 0 respondents named password reuse as a potential cause for receiving the notification. In Facebook and Instagram's notifications, which do allude to password reuse, about half of respondents listed password reuse as a potential cause. But that's still not everyone, and so this raises the question, why didn't more respondents list password reuse? Let's look back at one of these password reuse notifications from Instagram. As security experts, we can skim this. Your security is important, blah, 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 password reuse. But let's take a closer look. It says, the password you use for Instagram is the same as one that was stolen from another site. One that was stolen. Does that mean my password? Does it mean someone else's password was stolen? The notification still is very vague about password reuse. And in fact, we don't find any notifications that explicitly say you reuse passwords. Understandably, companies might be reluctant to blame users, but this vague wording may prevent users from fully mitigating the situation. See respondent 171, for example. They said, the chances of someone guessing that I use the same password are still incredibly low. And this is wrong. This is the exact opposite. The chances are actually extremely high that someone guesses that you use the same password. Attackers don't know for sure that you reused your password, but it's effectively free for them to run automated guessing attacks, and people reuse passwords all the time, so it turns out to be a pretty good bet for them to make. What did we learn from study 1? Well, current password reuse notifications they're good at eliciting concern, but they're not so good at explaining password reuse. So taking the successes and failures of notifications in study 1, we synthesized 5 notification goals. We established that a good password reuse notification should be received in a timely manner, and it should provide enough background about the root causes of this notification. We want this notification to direct the user to productive security actions, like changing their password to something unique, not reused, enabling two-factor authentication, and using password managers. It should also be perceived as legitimate and not phishing. And ultimately, if AcmeCo sends out a notification, we want users to increase their trust in AcmeCo. Even though some company other than AcmeCo may have been breached, we don't want users to blame AcmeCo. Instead, we want users to trust AcmeCo more for having found a reused password and then protecting their account. We took those 5 notification goals and made a model notification, which looked like this. And then we wanted to evaluate the impact of our individual design decisions in this model notification. So for study 2, we created 14 different versions of this notification. Those versions differed in 6 dimensions, including the delivery method of the notification, how explicitly it named password reuse, and how explicitly it suggested other actions. In study 2, we surveyed 588 respondents, also on mTurk with a 15-minute survey. And each respondent saw a notification that was one of those 15 versions, either the model notification or a variant of it, which varied across 6 different dimensions. All right, I have some good news and some bad news. I'll start with the good news. Across all variants, when we asked our respondents, what would you do about your AcmeCo password? Only 6% said that they would keep it the same. A vast majority, 90% of respondents, said that they would change their password if they received our notification. And that's really good. We want people to change their passwords in a situation like this. AcmeCo should probably force users to reset their password, but it's good here that we have evidence a majority of respondents are willing to reset their password. Okay, so what's the bad news? Well, even though most respondents said they were willing to change their password, we found that they intended to change it to something that would make them still vulnerable. So for the 90% of respondents who said that they would change their password, we asked them, how would you pick your new password? 2% said that they would choose something completely new, and 11% said they would use something that their password manager or browser created. These are good, but this is only 13% of people. Another 13% said they would completely reuse a password, and 68% said that they would change a few characters from a password they already use and use that. And so this is really scary because 81% of respondents are changing their password and they think that they're solving the problem, but really their passwords are not that much better than before, and they're right back where they started with vulnerable accounts. Looking deeper into this, we found lots of evidence in study 2 that users have the wrong threat model when it comes to password reuse. Respondent 338 said, I know my password is already strong and unlikely to be hacked. Okay, but if your password is really strong and you use it in 20 different places, and just one of those places uses a fast hash function, then it doesn't matter how strong it is. If a provider has already been breached, then it's probably been cracked already, and it would only take an attacker one guess. Respondent 69 said, the hack wasn't specific to this company, so it doesn't worry me. And this makes it clear that they are not thinking about password reuse attacks. If you reused a password, it doesn't matter where the hack came from or where the password was breached. If one company is breached, they're all vulnerable. One last quote. Respondent 300 said, until I see evidence of hacking, I prefer to keep my own sanity. And I prefer that they keep their own sanity too. But this strategy is not a great strategy. The consequences of password reuse are often invisible, and they're not evident right away. And so waiting to see evidence of it is a pretty dangerous plan. So to summarize our findings from study 2, we found that after seeing our notifications, respondents said they would change their passwords. However, they were continuing to reuse passwords or just slightly modifying their passwords, and this continues to put their accounts at risk. All of this is likely because password reuse is really complicated. This is a security audience, and Max still spent the first few minutes going through it. So users have an incomplete threat model, and they aren't thinking about an attacker that takes advantage of password reuse. So we started this project as a systematic study about how users understand password reuse notifications and how to improve their design. Many companies were sending password reuse notifications, and we were surprised by how different they all were. These notifications intended to warn users about situations that could have been caused by password reuse, but no one knew what the best practices were. After study one, we developed best practices developed on the notifications based on the notifications we had collected. Here they are. From each notification goal, we derived a best practice. Then, with these 5, we went back to look at the 24 notifications that we had collected. None of them followed all of these best practices. On average, they followed 2, and at best, they followed 4. So we created a model notification that does follow all of these best practices, and it's a good starting point for future research. But we found some useful information here for notification designers, but maybe future work can do even more to solve password reuse. Maybe we could come up with radically different ways of communicating password reuse, like more explicitly saying that they reuse passwords instead of vague and general statements. So future work should study novel notifications. But there's one last thing that we learned in this study. Let's return to the AcmeCo sysadmin. They want to protect their users, but they have no way to know whether a user's new password is actually a reused password from somewhere else. This is an ecosystem level problem. If your AcmeCo sysadmin doesn't know what the other passwords are, and they can't solve this problem, who else could? Well, maybe other parts of the ecosystem could have more visibility into this issue, like password managers or web browsers, which can often see many of users' passwords at the time of account creation. How well do they do at actually preventing password reuse? Unfortunately, not that well. None of them explicitly prevent users from reusing passwords. Instead, you have to know about the dangers of password reuse and actively try to fix it. You might have to go to special panes or setting pages and look for those warning signs. Many of these tools are silently allowing password reuse to occur without meaningfully bringing it to users' attention or explaining why it's a problem. So future work will need to investigate this problem from many different angles in order to find solutions. And ultimately, we will need to work together to stop users from doing things that are not in their best interests. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your talk. So your sample model notification here says go to the AcmeCo website or mobile app and we'll guide you. So that's great, but I bet, did any of your alternate versions have click here to change your password, which is a phishing attack, and I bet users will not be able to distinguish that notification from a phishing attack notification?
It's interesting because we did get some feedback from respondents, and that's why legitimacy was one of our notification goals, because especially in study one, there was a lot of different use of hyperlinks and exactly what you're mentioning. And so some people did mention that phishing was a risk. I don't know off the top of my head how many, what proportion, but yeah, that's a really good point.
Jeffrey Goldberg from 1Password. And having helped compose some of these notifications, one of the if AcmeCo is generating its messages based on information it's using from the Have I Been Pwned data, they don't know whether it's the user who has reused their password or not. And so that may be a source for why some of these messages are vague about that. And so it can be a challenge to say you reused your password when you don't actually know that to be the case.
That's true. For some of our notifications, we had some background, like the Facebook notification. There we know that they don't rely on have I been pwned, and that they run their own systems. As I said before, it requires a lot of resources, and smaller companies cannot afford that. So it might be a reason why they are so vague about that. Can be true. Yes, can agree.
So very interesting work. I guess you had mentioned that, well, a number of people say they are going to change passwords. Many announce plans to, pick something very similar. I'm curious, do you have a conjecture if one were to explicitly talk about the dangers of, selecting similar passwords in the notification? Do you think that would influence people's decisions?
Do you mean like explicitly saying you reused a password and this is bad because explain the
No, I mean saying explicitly you reused a password, we recommend you change it. When you change it, we recommend that you don't pick something that's similar because an attacker is likely to guess it.
Right. Yeah, I think that would clarify some of the confusion. One of the quotes that I didn't put in this presentation, there was a respondent who said, well, if a company asks me to change my password and they tell me to change it for all of the other sites, then I'll just get really annoyed and I won't change it and I'll be mad at this company. And so they're not thinking about exactly what needs to be explained to them. And so I think with that knowledge, they might be more understanding of why they need to do it and then actually take those actions.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your talk. If we consider that websites are storing hash of user passwords, then little modification in new password is enough for big change in hash of the real password. So why did you consider little modification as a bad selection?
Yeah, it depends on your attacker model. In online guesses, you are limited in that way that you can only try a bunch of passwords until the rate limiting kicks in. For offline guessing, it's completely fine to try common variations and transformations of the password that the attacker has at hand, and for example change the last digits to something else, increase the digits. Summer 17 will become summer 18 and stuff like that. This is a common approach, and in fact we have seen this in the wild.